Welcome to Mishna study Masechet Shabbat Perek Zayin Mishnah Bet. Over here in this Mishnah, we're finally going to discuss the Melachot of Shabbat. What are the 39 Melachot of Shabbat? And we learned these 39 Melachot from the Mishkan. So whatever work, whatever melacha they performed in building the Mishkan, Kadosh Baruch Hu says you need to rest on Shabbat, and you cannot build the Mishkan on Shabbat. So we learned that these 39 actions of types of labor are going to be asur, and you'll see how they all lead in a certain direction. Like the first 11 are really building up to baking. Right, and you have panim, you have different, in action in the Mishkan that they would do. You'd have to, plant and plow and harvest the wheat and go ahead and grind it up and bake it, and everything is all these melachot are leading up to the that work of baking. And then we'll see. I'll flip quickly. You'll see we're going to also talk about hide from animals, right? They need to actually, build, the Mishkan goes from different, also from hide, and they would have to also sew, and for the coverings of the Mishkan, that's going to all lead up to, shearing wool all the way until sewing. And then we're going to see, so that was more from the shearing the wool to the sewing. And then we'll talk about the leather, right? The hide of the animals, right? From trapping an animal and slaughtering it and working that leather, right? Also from another covering of the Mishkan. And then we'll talk about building, right? Actually, to build the Keddashim of the Mishkan, right? And carrying from one place to the next, right? Passing the Keddashim from one wagon to the next. So all these I'd say these four categories, right? Like we said, of the baking category, and then the the fabric category, and then the leather category, and then the building category. Those are going to be what's asur, and they're broken up into 39 different melachot. So avot melachot, the melachot of Shabbat, the primary labors that are asur on Shabbat are 40 haserahat, right? 40 minus 1, 39 melachot of Shabbat. What are they? Ahoresh, plowing. Vazorea, sowing the field, planting seeds. Vakotzer, right, reaping, right, cutting, harvesting. Me'amer, gathering, right, you gather, gather the wheat into a pile. Vehadash, threshing, right, threshing the wheat. Vazoreh is winnowing it, right, when you throw the wheat up into the air and all the chaff blows away. Borer, right? Borer is separating the stones, the rocks, from the actual wheat itself. Tochen, grinding it, turning it into flour. Menaked is sifting it, right? So the fine flour goes out the bottom, and all some whatever chaff that's left over stays on top. Halash, kneading dough. Ofeh, baking. Right, so that all falls into the category leading up to the baking. Then we move on to the fabric stage. Hagozezet atzemer. Right, you went and sheared the wool off the sheep. V'hamlabeno, whiten it. V'hamnapetzo, you comb it, right? You comb the wool to get all the all the psolet out of it. V'atzovo, dyeing the wood. V'atovehu, spin. Right, now you have to spin the wool into different threads, so you spin it. V'hamesech, right? Mesech is stretching the threads. Right, you stretch it on this weaving loom, right? Right? You actually, thread, right? You create these two loops on the batenirim. This is the weaving loom. Right? You weave two threads. Right? Potzea is you're cutting, right? You're cutting two threads. Hakosher v'hamatir, two separate ones. You tie a knot, and matir, you untie a knot. Right? All these are also the process of making a fabric. V'atofer shte tefirot, person sews, right? Two tefirot, right? In and out, right? So you get a full, right? That's what holds. V'akorea amenat litfor shte tefirot, right? Or if you rip in order to sew two threads, right? Also that falls under, that's a melacha in itself. Now it's interesting, right? You need to rip in order to sew, right? Ripping itself, right, is destructive. Something destructive is not a melacha. But if you're doing it to construct something, then it becomes a melacha. Hatzad sevi, right? If a person hunts a deer, v'ashohato, he slaughters it. V'amafshito, he skins it, right? Removes the hide. V'hamolho, right? Molho is you salt it. V'hamabedo, and you me'abed, right? You actually work, right? You work the leather itself. The Gemara says that really the molho and me'abedo, salting it and working it, right? Salting it is really part of its working stage. So they count this as one, and instead they add another melachan over here, and that's the sartet, right? The sartet is when you have to make the lines on the klaf when you're writing, right? When you actually need to do this, you need to see the tut for a sefer Torah, right? Otherwise it's pasul, right? So over here the sartet is making those lines. That's the melacha they add because they lump these these two together. Veham mohako, erasing. Right, erasing, they would just scrape off the letter. Oh, sorry, no, I was not talking scrape off letter. Mohako is to smoothen out the hide, right? They would remove the hairs from it. Is cutting it into even, right? You're measuring it out and cutting it out into exact measuring, strips. Writing two letters, right? Or if you erase in order to write two letters, right? That's how he says one letter is an ot, two letters are otot. Haboneh, right now we move on to the building stage. Haboneh is building. Ve'asoter is demolishing. Ve'hamchabeh, extinguishing a fire. Ve'hamav'ir, right? Lighting a fire, kindling a fire. Ve'hamakeba patish. Makeba patish literally means striking that final blow with the hammer, right? Hamim point out that anything that's the final stage, the final process in something, right? So even if you shine off the keli at the end, right, to make it to put it in its final stage, that would be considered and carrying from one reshut to another, from one domain to another. These are the 40 melachot that are 40 minus 1. Those are the 39 avot melachot. So I explained most of this as I went through. I just want to point out the difference between an av and a toleda, right? So everything we mentioned over here, when I say an av melacha, right, the primary melacha. So let's say we have, for example, baking, right? So baking is a primary melacha. The same would also be considered a primary melacha under the same category of baking would be cooking, right? It's the same concept. It's the same action, right? Just, when you're doing with, you bake bread, but you cook you cook a dish, right? It's the same idea, right? You're still doing the same, transferring food from its raw stage to its cooked stage. So that falls under both of them are the same av. Similarly, what we mentioned before, right? If a person goes and he detaches something from the ground, so the Mishnah called it kotzer, but that would be the same thing if I'm picking an olive off a tree or picking a grape off a vine, right? Even though the Hebrew language has different verbs for them, right? But at the end of the day, it's still detaching something from the ground, and that all falls under the av of kotzer, and they're all considered an av, right? Even if it's kotzer or if it's mosek, zait, right? You're picking an olive. Those are both the same av. Now, sometimes you have an av and a toleda. What's the difference over here? An av is a primary. Toleda would be, let's say, if a person is grinding wheat. Okay, so he's taking something, he's turning it into smaller pieces. Now, if a person goes in and saws wood, right, it's not considered tochen. That's not grinding, grinding a food, right? But he's turning something into sawdust. So, if you do the same thing with metal, so that would be a av and a toleda, primary and a toleda. This is how Rambam explains it. Other Rishonim are different and explain this differently. But it's just important to point out that distinction. And as we said, there are 39 melachot, right? There are 39 total. And we learn from this Mishnah, the ending there, the Gemara's Doresh, Hare'elu avot melachot. These are the 40 melachot. Why are we repeating this again? Right? And then he says, arba'im hasirahat. These 39. Right, so there's 39 to point out that where a person is hayav on every single one of those 39. Right, if he does them, he does all those melachot, right? You forgot.
to perform did all these melachot, one after the next, right? He's going to be chayav, on each one, right? On all 39. And then it says, Hare'elu avot melachot, right? This is mi'ut, as we mentioned, if a person does an av and a toledah, right, or two avot, right, he's going to be only obligated for bringing one korban for that category, right? So if a person went ahead, he cut weed, he picked an olive and picked a grape, he only has to bring one, right, because it all falls under the av of kotzer. And then it says again, right? This is actually to point out that there's only 39, because there's an opinion, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion actually has more, right? Rabbi Yehuda actually adds shovet and medaktek, right? Shovet is a person, he bangs, right, with a stick, he bangs that weaving loom to strain out, all the threads of the warp. By that loom, and medaktek is when he separates it with his fingers, right? He separates them. It counts as a separate avot melachot. Chachamim don't count as a separate melachot. They say it's all the toledah makeh b'patish, right? Of striking that final blow, as we mentioned earlier. And yeah, these are all the melachot that we find by the Mishkan, and therefore we got to this number of 39. And it's important to remember these, even know them by heart, right? These are the melachot of Shabbat. And once you know these, what we're not allowed to do today, anything we're not allowed to do, really needs to fall under these categories, these melachot, unless it falls under the category of muktzeh, right? Which we'll discuss later on in our masech.